All right, hello everyone. Today we're going to do a little more talking about pruning trees. And so here we're going to have this be our demonstration tree. This is some kind of ornamental maple tree. And we're going to be talking a little bit about central leader pruning. So this is a really good example of central leader pruning, where you can see we got our trunk right here. And it's kind of going up. And you can see right here up at the top, we kind of have what ideally would be one central leader. We can see there's like two co-dominant leaders, two kind of forks at the top, and they're kind of competing. So I'm just going to show you kind of how I would start pruning a tree like this if we're going to be doing our central leader pruning. So first off, I have some tools with me. And one thing you want to do is you're going to want to sterilize your tool. So here I have a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. You could also make a bleach solution. It doesn't need to be pure bleach. I think it's like 0.01% or 1% bleach solution, something like that. I think it's 0.01. Don't check me. You're gonna have to look that up and tell yourself. But I like to use isopropyl alcohol. So my first tool here is I'm gonna be using my handy dandy Felco pruners. These are a really nice pair of hand pruners. So all I'm gonna do is just put a little bit of the isopropyl alcohol on the blade. And essentially this is just to make sure that you're not spreading disease. So I don't remember what I used these on last, whether it's a diseased tree or not. So you wanna make sure you sterilize your tools before beginning. So I'm just gonna start out with my little Felco pruners. I also have with me a little pruning saw. These ones are pretty cute, little handy pruner that you can keep in your pants pocket. And I also have a nice pair of loppers here, all of which I'll sterilize before using. So let's come on in and we'll start and take a look at a few different things I'm noticing here. So first we'll start here at the bottom. So here you can see there are all these suckers coming out, these little suckers. We call this epicormic growth. And essentially this is part of the tree's natural defenses. So if the main trunk, if something happens to this, it has little suckers in here that can kind of grow out. So these are kind of adventitious buds that kind of come up just in case something happens to the tree. So first thing I'm gonna start off is I'm just gonna trim all these off. And here, you can come in a little close and I'll show you how I trim those. I trim off pretty darn close to the base. So for instance, some people may trim thing and they might leave a whole long stub, like they just trim it back like that. And you're just left with this stub, and this is either going to bud off and branch out and bush out, or it's just gonna be a dead piece of wood sitting there. So I like to cut it nice and close to the tree, so that way they don't come back. So I'm just gonna cut all these off. Sometimes you gotta pull them back to get them in there good. And get that. All right, so start, we got off the epicormic growth. Now we're gonna kind of move up. And so another thing I like to think about is we're having a mower coming through here on a regular basis. So I wanna make sure that this is the place that we live at, and our landlord's elderly mother is the one who has to do the mowing. So I don't want her having to having to get too close and run into any branches. So I'm gonna be thinking about things like that. Also, another thing right here, I noticed crossing branches is something you're also gonna get over. So if you look over here, you can see this branch is actually touching, it's rubbing up against this one. And what happens is that eventually turns into a point where the branch will kind of rot and die when it's making contact with other branches. So we want to get rid of crossing branches. So we have to decide, do we want to get rid of this branch or do we want to get rid of this branch? And looking at it, I'm probably going to keep this branch here because this looks like a nice, strong, healthy branch. I'm going to get rid of this one here. So we're just going to cut that off. Also, we can get rid of any dead or dying branches. This one here, you can see it just it snaps. That's how you can tell it's dead. So it just easily snaps and breaks, whereas a living branch should more like bend. See, this one's alive, so I try to turn it and it just kind of bends, whereas this one just kind of breaks. So we're going to cut off all dead growth. So we're going to get off that guy. There's another dead branch there, another one right there. All right. So next I want to look at how branches are coming into contact with one another. So, and also looking at the angle of attachment. So we could think imagine this is an even plane and this would be a 90-degree angle. We want to make sure we don't get branches that are too acute, so acute angle of attachment, so anything greater than 45-degree angle. Right here, this is a nice strong angle of attachment. You can see here it has a nice sturdy branch collar. If you can see right there, there's a little ridge. That's the branch collar. And that shows that it has a nice strong connection there. If we look up here, for instance, you can see that this would be an acute angle of attachment. It's very narrow. And so eventually right now it looks all right, but you can imagine as time goes on, this angle of attachment, it kind of almost, it's like a lever. If I pull on it, you can imagine this thing just kind of yanking off versus something like this. It's got a little bendability to it and a little more sturdiness. So I'm probably going to get rid of this branch here with that acute angle of attachment. It's just too narrow of an angle. We want things that are going to be at least a 45-degree angle, so we want it to be out more like that. So I'll probably get rid of this one. To do that, I'm going to get my loppers. I'm going to bring out my little pruning saw here, and I'm just going to sterilize it really quick. So now I'm going to get rid of this branch here. And I'm going to demonstrate what you would do to take off a large branch. Now, mind you, this is not a large branch, but I just want to kind of demonstrate what you would do if this happened to be a really big branch here. So one thing you can imagine when I'm going to be making a cut on something like this is I want to be outside this branch collar. So this one has a pretty easy to see branch collar. See that ridge right there? This is kind of where it makes a strong connection to the trunk. So I want to stay outside that branch collar, but I also don't want to keep it too far up where you're having a little chunk of dead wood. So you kind of want to keep it right about there. And also you got to think about your angle of your cut. So if you cut it like perfectly flat, for instance, it's almost going to create like a little area where water could pool up. So it's nice to have it cut at a little bit of an angle, like a 45-degree angle, something like that. So when it rains, the water will shed off. So I could try putting my saw in right here, but I think it would be a little easier to cut in like that. So I'd start cutting, making my cut underneath it. Make sure I have a nice strong grip on it. And that's probably where I'd be starting to make my cut, is right there. So if this was a bigger branch and I was worried about, so you can imagine if this is a really big, heavy branch, the second I cut this branch and it starts to get close to the point where it's about to break off, the weight of this thing would just kind of pull off, and it could take a chunk of the tree with it. You know, it could take, like, start pulling bark off of the trunk. We don't want that. So in those kind of cases, we actually make a couple different cuts. So to do that, I'll demonstrate is I'd make an undercut. So I'd make an undercut a little ways up from it. So if it starts to fall back, it's going to peel up to the branch up to where the undercut is. So I'll start my undercut right here. I'll just cut part way. It doesn't have to be super far. So see, I made a little undercut right there. And now I'm just going to cut above that. And we'll see. You can see sometimes the branch will start to get a little flicky, so you want to hold it up. And that one came off nice and easy. But you can imagine, what if this branch, like I was cutting from this way and it just pulled off and this thing just falls off and it just starts pulling the bark off with it. Once it gets to right here, the bark will stop because you have that undercut right there. That's what stops it. So now that I got a much smaller thing and more manageable. I can just take the rest of that branch off. And be careful when you get to the end that you don't cut into the branch. And boom, that's what we want to see right there. Outside of the branch collar, a nice like 45-degree angle so water will shed off it, with a nice smooth cut with a really good saw. So that was great. That was a good cut right there. So other things we're going to be looking at. The crotch angle of this branch isn't great. I like the way that this one kind of comes up. This creates a stronger angle of attachment rather than this one, so I'm going to take this one out here. Let's see. And now, looking at some of these other branches, so I'm going to have to get an orchard ladder to do the last part. But look up there. See how we have at the top? What we want is one central leader. There should be only type. See how it forks into two? I'd want to decide which one of those branches I want to be my central leader. Right now I'm looking at the one on the left. Looks like it would be a better choice for central leader because you can see it's coming off the main trunk while the other one's over there. And so the problem is having those two central leaders is they're going to compete for apical dominance. So essentially all the oxen is going to be hogged by the one that's kind of going higher. And so if you have two of them, they're going to kind of compete with one another. And we don't want that. All right, so that's a kind of a little start of how I start pruning something like this. We'll get back to it later and I'll show you some more pruning videos.